Today we're going to do a new deck tech for a deck that I've put together that is something else. If you're a fan of meme decks, I think you're going to like this one. There are a few cards in here that you might recognize. Approach of the Second Sun, pretty popular, it sees play in quite a few decks. Thassa's Oracle, quite a powerful card, some people might even say it's too powerful. Revel in Riches, another pretty popular card, I like this one myself. What do all these cards have in common though? All of these are alternate win conditions. All of them say if you fulfill some condition on this card, you win the game. And I've often wondered what would it look like if you put every card that says you win the game into one deck. Well, it would look something like this. That's right, there are 29 of these cards that say you win the game, and we're playing all of them. And outside of just 2 exceptions, it is possible to win with any one of these cards. If you'd like to purchase any of the cards that you see in this video, you can get those by going to the sponsor of the channel, Face to Face Games. They're the largest Magic store in Canada, and if you use code 8th Place Dave at the checkout, you can save 5% on your order. So you probably want to know which commander are we going to use for this deck. Well, it has to be a 5-color commander, seeing as we're playing all of these cards, which have 5 different colors in between them. And there are several options for 5-color commanders that could work for this deck, but the one I've decided to go with is Garth One-Eye. And after some consideration, I've found that this card is kind of the perfect commander for this deck. The reason for that is because we're playing 29 win conditions as well as cards in order to accommodate these win conditions, that leaves very little room in the deck for good cards, essentially. We can't really play a whole lot of ramp or removal or card draw or things like that. However, with Garth here, Garth essentially lets us play 6 more cards in our deck, because with Garth's ability, we can tap it, choose a card name that hasn't been chosen from among Disenchant, Brain Geyser, Terror, Shivan Dragon, Regrowth, and Black Lotus. We create a copy of the card, and we can cast that copy. So with Garth here, we gain access to card effects that we normally wouldn't really have a whole lot of in this deck. Normally when I do a deck tech, I'll start off by going through the creatures, the instant sorceries, things like that. This isn't your typical deck though, so we're going to go through each one of these win conditions, see how we can win with them, and then I'll show you which cards I've put in the deck in order to actually be able to pull off the win. The first group of win conditions is one that you'll probably see most often in other games. These ones are played quite a lot in other decks. These are ones that essentially allow you to win by having no cards in your library, or very few in the case of Thassa's Oracle. So we have Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. These are also the cards which are easiest to pull off the win with, which is probably why they're played in other decks. But in order to win with these, you only need to play them alongside one other card really, which can be either Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact to essentially mill yourself and then get the win with one of these. As we keep going though, we're going to start getting into some other cards which become more difficult to pull off the win with. Next we have Approach of the Second Sun, which I mentioned earlier. This one, you don't really need to accommodate it to make it work. You can just kind of play this card as is and you can win with it. You just play it, and then when you get 7 cards deep into your deck, you play it again, and if it resolves, you win. So that kind of works just on its own. With this one, you could use one of these cards to help the win come a bit faster, or any other tutor for that matter. Next up is this group of cards, and all of these cards are ones which care about how much life you have. So we have Felidar Sovereign. It's a 6 mana 4/6 with Vigilance and Lifelink. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. One commander, you start with 40 life, so if you can get this out early, you could just win, but chances are you'll need to be able to gain some life, so we do have ways to gain life. This one actually works with itself as well, since it has lifelink. This can gain you the life that you need. We have this Near-Death Experience. It's an enchantment for 2 white, so 5 mana total. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 1 life, you win the game. This one isn't really so much about gaining life, but it does care about how much life you have. This one is pretty difficult to pull off, but it is possible to win with this, and once again, this is another card where you don't need to do anything else alongside it to have it work. You could just play this and then incidentally be at 1 life. That's probably not going to happen, but it is possible. We have this Test of Endurance. This is 2 white, so 4 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 50 more life, you win the game, so it's very similar to Felidar Sovereign right here, except you need 10 more life. We've got this Celestial Convergence. Once again, 2 white, 4 mana enchantment. Comes into play with 7 Omen counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an Omen counter from Celestial Convergence. If there are no Omen counters on it, the player with the highest life total wins the game. If 2 or more players are tied, the game is a draw. So this one gets into 2 themes actually. One is the life, which we've got here, but there's another group of cards which cares about having counters on it. So this one starts with 7 counters on it and you remove them so it goes down. So you want to make sure that you have the highest life once the final counter is removed from this card. Next is Happily Ever After here from Throne of Eldraine, a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. That's quite a few conditions to meet. However, we can fulfill all those conditions in this deck pretty easy actually. It's just a matter of doing them all at once. So some of these cards here, like this one itself, and Felidar Sovereign and other cards in the deck, can help us gain life. We would also need to have 5 colors among permanents we control. Well, if we have our commander Garth in play, that fulfills that condition right away. And then the hard one really is if there are 6 or more card types among permanents we control or are in our graveyard. But we do have many different card types in the deck, so we could set that up as well. So I'll show you a few cards now, which I've included in the deck, to try and help these win conditions along. So with several of these cards, we want to make sure that we're gaining a lot of life. So I've put this card right here in the deck, Revival Revenge, mostly for the Revenge side, but the Revival one can be quite relevant as well. Revenge is a 6 mana sorcery. It says, double your life total, target opponent loses half their life rounded up. So doubling your life, hopefully it's going to get you above 40 or 50. There's a pretty good chance it will. And then also, having an opponent lose half their life rounded up, that's not nothing as well. Revival is pretty cool too, though. Return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This part of the card can help with some of the other win conditions that we'll get to later. We've got this March of the Multitudes, which can make us a bunch of 1/1 white soldiers with a lifelink, so we can use those to gain life as well. And then there are 2 cards here which allow us to kind of manipulate how much life we have, because with either one of these we can be paying 2 life, so that can help us to get to the exactly 1 life that we need with near-death experience with our Doom Whisperer or our Razaketh right there. Speaking of Doom Whisperer and Razaketh, we have a win condition right here that cares about having those in play. Liliana's Contract, a 5 mana enchantment. It says when it enters the battlefield, you draw 4 cards and lose 4 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more demons with different names, you win the game. So that means we need to be playing at least 4 demons in the deck that have different names. So we have the Razaketh and the Doom Whisperer, and I've also included a Rune-Scarred Demon and a Rakdos the Showstopper. The reason I've chosen these, you've seen the Razaketh and Doom Whisperer already. They help for this win condition as well as the one I mentioned. They can really help you to get to the cards you need, so I feel like these are probably the best just good stuff demons you could play. They're just good cards on their own. Other cards play these decks outside of the fact that they're demons. They have very good abilities. Same with Rune-Scarred Demon. This is basically like a demonic tutor on a stick, so this can definitely help us to get a card that we need out of our deck. And then Rakdos here, the reason I've chosen this as the 4th demon to include in the deck is because this flips coins, and there's a win condition in the deck that cares about flipping coins. So I want to have cards in the deck which allow me to flip coins, and this can kind of fulfill both of those win conditions with the flipping coins, and also the fact that it's a demon for Liliana's Contract. So these are the 4 demons that I've included in the deck for this win condition. This is the win condition that cares about flipping coins. Chance Encounter, you might be familiar with this, as it's in the coin flipping deck. The notorious one, the Heads I Win, Tails You Lose deck. This one, though, is a 4 mana enchantment. It's red. It says, Whenever you win a coin flip, put a luck counter on chance encounter. At the beginning of your upkeep, if chance encounter has 10 or more luck counters on it, you win the game. So you need to at least win one coin flip in order to get this card started. You can win just by winning coin flips and putting counters on it this way. However, we also have ways to put additional counters onto cards. So first I'll show you some coin flipping ones. You saw the Rakdos already. We also have Mirror March, 6 mana enchantment. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip you've won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste, exile them at the beginning of next end step. So this card, if you're really lucky, you could just win all those coin flips and turn this on. Chances are you won't be able to, but this can allow you to flip quite a few coins. And another reason we have this in the deck is because some of our win conditions care about having multiple of the same creature in play, so this can help with those win conditions too. And then a third coin flipping card is one that's very popular. Mana Crypt right here. This is very easy to include. Usually I don't include Mana Crypt in my deck. However, it's going to go in this one for sure because we care about flipping coins. It works with this. But also, this deck kind of needs all the help it can get to work well. So I am powering it up in pretty much any way that I can. So we've got these 3 coin flipping cards right here. Now I mentioned win conditions that care about having multiple copies of the same card. That's these right here. We have Biovisionary out of Gatecrash. It's a 3 mana, 2/3 human wizard. It says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. So this is a card that was made before Commander got super popular. I'm not sure if it was made with Commander in mind. Probably not, because you can only play one copy of this card in your deck, right? So that means in order to actually win with this in Commander, you have to be making copies of it. Fortunately, we have a few ways to do that. Second one is Mechanized Production. This one is quite popular as well. This goes in some other decks. Like it's an actual pretty good card. 4 mana enchantment, Aura, enchant an artifact you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of enchanted artifact. Then if you control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, you win the game. So this one can work on its own with just any artifact. We're going to include some stuff to try and help it out though. Biovisionary though, it does need help to actually work. So we're going to put in some ways to copy creatures. The first one is Progenitor Mimic, 6 mana shapeshifter. It's a 0/0. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature, except it has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if this creature isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So we will be able to copy Biovisionary that way, or if this is on an artifact creature, we copy that as well. We also have Clever Impersonator. This can just enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent, so this could be an extra copy of something for these as well. And then we have one of my favorite cards, actually, I think, is Stolen Identity, also out of Gatecrash. 6 mana sorcery. I'm surprised that this card doesn't see more play than it does. I think this card is really good. I play it in my SIG deck as well. So it says, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target artifact or creature. It doesn't even have to be one that you control. Also, it says Cipher. You may exile this spell encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So we can make a copy of something and then encode this onto a creature, and then every time that creature deals combat damage to a player, we can cast this again and then be making more copies. So with these cards, we do have a way to get the 4 Biovisionaries we need, and these can also help out Mechanized Production. And that'll segue us into these win conditions. These ones care about having multiple artifacts. One here is Revel in Riches. This card works quite well with Mechanized Production because Mechanized Production doesn't say that you need to have 8 copies of the artifact which is enchanted. It's just 8 artifacts with the same name. Revel in Riches can give us that with just having 8 treasures. These ones also are cards which can work just on their own. You don't need to put any other cards in the deck to actually win with them. You can just win with these on their own, but you can make it a lot easier with other cards. So Revel in Riches, then Hellkite Tyrant. It's a 6 mana, 6/5 flying trample dragon. Says when it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. So the cards which allow us to copy things can help these out. However, these ones are also just kind of good cards on their own, so these can work regardless of having other cards to help them out. Continuing with the theme of having lots of permanents in play, here are two win conditions which care about having lots of creatures rather than lots of artifacts. First one is Halo Fountain. I'm a pretty big fan of this card. I think this is good in many other decks outside of this one, but 3 mana artifact. It says white, tap, untap a tapped creature you control, make a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. 2 white, tap, untap 2 tapped creatures you control, draw a card, or 5 white, tap, untap 15 creatures you control, you win the game. We also have Epic Struggle right here, out of, what's that, Judgment? 4 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more creatures, you win the game. This one is going to be pretty difficult to win with. The thing with Halo Fountain is it can just fuel itself by making creatures. You'll get to 15 creatures before you get to 20. However, we have another way to try and make these cards work. You've actually seen it already, this March of the Multitudes. I mentioned this gaining you life with these creatures before. However, this can also just put a bunch of creatures into play at instant speed. And it's great that it's instant speed because you can surprise your opponent with it. You could have one of these in play on their end step, just make a whole bunch of creatures with this, and then use those creatures to win with one of these. Next up, we've got this group of win conditions, which all care about having counters on them. So the first card here is Darksteel Reactor. Is a 4 mana artifact. It has indestructible. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a charge counter on this. When this has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win the game. There's also Azor's Elocutors here. 5 mana, 3/5, Human Advisor. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a filibuster counter on this. Then if it has 5 or more filibuster counters on it, you win the game. However, whenever a source deals damage to you, you remove a filibuster counter from this. Makes it much harder to win with. There's Helix Pinnacle. Very simple, 1 mana enchantment, has Shroud, or you can pay X, put X tower counters on this, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on it, you win the game. And there's Simic Ascendancy, pretty popular card actually. Blue and a green enchantment, you can pay 1 blue and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on this at the beginning of your upkeep. If this has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So with these, they kind of work on their own, some of them more than others, but we really want to be using some other cards to really help these cards out. So we want some ways to be able to put more counters on these permanents. We can do that one way with Gilder Baron, 3 mana creature. You can pay 2 and either blue or green and untap this. Then for each counter on a permanent, put another one of those counters on it. So this essentially would double the counters you have on something that can really help these out to win the game. We also have Deep Close Skate. This is kind of the same type of thing. When it enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. So you could use this to get a bunch of extra counters. And then for this card in particular, or this one as well actually, we can put more counters on these by dumping mana into them. So if we have a way to generate infinite mana, we could kind of just win with Helix Pinnacle. So we do have a way to generate infinite mana in this deck. We have the Devoted Druid Vizier of Remedies combo. The way that works is with Devoted Druid, it says you can tap it to add a green, and then you can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. So normally you'd only be able to do that once before it dies. However, Vizier of Remedies says if 1 or more -1/-1 counters will be put on a creature you control, that many -1/-1 counters are put instead. So with these, you can just tap this infinitely for green mana because this will prevent the -1 counters from being put on it. So if you have those in play with Helix Pinnacle, you can just put the 100 counters on it that way. With Simic Ascendancy, you'll need a way to get blue mana, because this only provides you green, but this can go a long way to help this card out. Next, we've got a few win conditions that are all kind of unique themes on their own. There were groups of win conditions that were similar before, but these ones, they're all kind of their own kind of thing. So there's Mael's RA here, mostly recently reprinted in Double Masters 2022. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you control a creature with power 5 or greater, then you gain 10 life. If you control a creature with power 10 or greater, then you win the game. If you control a creature with power 20 or greater. So that can kind of work pretty well, actually, alongside something like Simic Ascendancy right here, because these can help each other out to kind of fulfill each other's condition by putting counters on creatures and making creature really big. We have Maze's End, a very fun card. People like to build decks around this, but yes, we have Maze's End in here, and we have 12 gates in our mana base in order to be able to make this work with our gates. We have Ramses Assassin Lord. This is a pretty new one out of Baldur's Gate, I believe. It's a 4 mana 4/4 legendary creature, human assassin with death touch. Other assassins you control get +1/+1. I believe that does literally nothing in the deck. Maybe there's a weird way to make it do something, but anyway. Whenever a player loses the game, if they were attacked this turn by an assassin you controlled, you win the game. So this one is also really hard to make work. It's in here though because it says you win the game on it. The way we would make this work is just by itself. So if you can attack someone with this and make them lose the game, then you win, because we have no other assassins in the deck, but you can win the game that way with this. Triskaidekaphile out of Midnight Hunt. 2 mana 1/3, you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. You can pay 4 mana to draw a card. I think this card is actually quite good just on its own. Once again, this is one that doesn't really need a whole lot in order to work, but there are some cards we have that allow us to draw extra cards and whatnot, so this one is actually one that could work quite well. Barren Glory here. This is another one that's pretty hard to make work. This is a 6 mana enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no permanents other than Barren Glory and have no cards in hand, you win the game. So that's a pretty hard condition to meet. However, we can do it with a card like Decree of Annihilation right here. This is an 8 mana sorcery, exile all artifacts, creatures, and lands from the battlefield, all cards from all graveyards, and all cards from all hands. So if you have Barren Glory out, you might have noticed this does not exile enchantments. So if you have Barren Glory, you play Decree of Annihilation, probably you'll just win. So that's our way to make this work. Outside of that, it's going to be pretty hard. Then this other one, which is quite hard to make work as well, Mortal Kombat. It's a 4 mana enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 20 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you win the game. The thing with this deck is, as I said, it's hard to fit cards in here because we have so many win conditions. Because of that reason, we only have 22 creatures in the deck outside of our commander. So that means that we need to have 20 of our 22 creatures in our graveyard in order to win with this. But you can win with it. We do have a way to kind of help ourselves out with that. With this card you saw earlier, Doom Whisperer. You can be paying 2 life and surveilling 2. If you're lucky, you can just dump all your creatures into your graveyard that way, maybe. That could help you put 20 creatures in your graveyard. As I said, it's pretty difficult to win with this card, but it's possible anyway. So while that card was very difficult, however, at least possible to win with, these are 2 win conditions in the deck which are literally not possible to win with. We have Battle of Wits, 5 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 200 or more cards in your library, you win the game. Well, in the commander format, you're not allowed to have more than 100 cards in your library, so as far as I know, there's literally no way to win with this card. But it says you win the game, so we're playing it. That's the thing with this deck, is we're playing every card that says you win the game. There's also Hedron Alignment. This is a 3 mana enchantment with hexproof. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can reveal your hand. If you do, you win the game if you own a card named Hedron Alignment in exile, in your hand, in your graveyard, and on the battlefield. Well, it's also not possible to do that. However, this card, and actually Battle of Wits as well, they can do something in the deck. Hedron Alignment right here also says you can pay 1 and a blue and scry 1. So, you know, we can't win the game with it, but we can scry with it at least, right? Battle of Wits doesn't have an activated ability like that. However, it's blue, so you know what? We can pitch it to Force of Will. Both of these cards can serve a purpose by being pitched to Force of Will, so there's that at least. So that was all of the win conditions, and outside of those last 2, it is actually possible to win with all of them. I'll show you a few more cards I put in the deck to help the deck work. Actually, first though, there's one other fun one. This card doesn't say you win the game, but it does say a player loses the game. Door to Nothingness is a very fun card. 5 mana artifact. Comes into play tapped. You can pay white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green, so 10 mana total. Tap this and sacrifice it. Target player loses the game. This is actually pretty easy to do in this deck, seeing as we're playing Garth and we have ways to make infinite mana and whatnot. So this is a legit way to take someone out of the game. It doesn't say you win the game, but we're still playing it. Now for some actual good cards to try and make the deck work. We've got some ramp here. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. We can play extra lands and it'll help us fix our mana. We have Bloom Tender. This is really great for ramp in a 5-color deck. If you have Garth in play, this just taps for 5. Kiora's Follower can untap a permanent. This works really well with Bloom Tender. Say if we have Door to Nothingness and Garth, we could tap this for 5 mana. Use this to untap it. Tap to get our other 5. That gives us the mana we need for Door to Nothingness. Also with Kiora's Follower, what's really cool is Garth itself needs to tap to use its ability. So we could use Kiora's Follower to untap Garth to get another activation out of it in one turn. We've also got Birds of Paradise. Great ramp card, provides any mana color. And you've seen Devoted Druid already. Outside of the Vizier of Remedies combo, it does also just work as a mana dork. Some more ramp here. We've got 3 Visits and Nature's Lore, both very good ramp sorceries. Some artifact ramp. As I mentioned earlier, this deck needs all the help it can get to work. It's by no means a good deck, I would say. I think it's very fun to play, but it really needs a lot of help to work. So we are playing Mana Crypt and Mana Vault. Obviously, we're playing Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, and then since it's a 5-color deck, we've got Chromatic Lantern as well. Because the deck can be quite slow to start and we don't want to just get run over, we're playing a Ghostly Prison here to try and prevent ourselves from just getting run over. We'll make our opponents pay 2 for each creature they control that's attacking us, so this can do a lot of work. We have 1 Wrath here in the form of Austere Command. As I mentioned before, there isn't really room in the deck for a whole lot outside of the win conditions and way to make them work, but I wanted to play 1 Wrath at least as kind of like a catch-all answer, and the one that I've chosen is Austere Command because it can answer basically all creatures, all artifacts, and all enchantments. And the thing, though, is we sometimes want to be having all of our artifacts and enchantments in play, some of our creatures, and this allows us to have a lot of choice in what we're removing. It's very similar to something like Farewell, but I've gone with Austere Command. We have 2 free counter spells in Force of Will and Pact of Negation. It would really suck if we're about to turn on one of our win conditions, something we've worked really hard to get, and then our opponent just counters what we're doing or finds a way to stop us, but we have 2 free counter spells to try and stop that from happening. And then we also have 2 tutors here, Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor. This can really help us out to find the other piece of whatever we're looking for to try and turn on one of our win conditions. Those are all of the non-land cards in the deck. We're going to go over the lands now, though. These are quite important in this deck, seeing as it's a 5-color deck, and the lands matter for some of our win conditions. So as we're playing Maze's End, we're playing at least 10 gates. I've got 12 in the deck here, just in case some of them get milled or something. So we've got Thran Portal, very good gate actually. We've got the gates from Baldur's Gate here. We have Heap Gate, Manor Gate, Cliff Gate, Sea Gate, Black Dragon Gate, and Citadel Gate. These all come into play tapped, I believe. However, they're kind of just better than the Guild Gates because they allow us to choose the second color that we're getting. So we're playing these ones. We just got some Guild Gates here. Rakdos, Azorius, Golgari, Izzet, Selesnya, and that's it. You could probably choose any 5 Guild Gates, but these are the ones that I grabbed out of my binder, so that's what we got right here. So those are our 12 gates. We're playing all 10 Triomes just to make sure, because as I said, it's a 5-color deck. It's kind of all over the place. We just really want to make sure that we have the colors of mana that we need, so we're playing all 10 Triomes. Most of the lands in the deck come into play tapped, but that's okay. It's a slow deck anyway. So all of the ones from Ikoria and all of the ones from Capenna. And we have some rainbow lands. By rainbow lands, I just mean they tap for any color essentially. So Command Tower, Plaza of Heroes, Exotic Orchard, Forbidden Orchard, Reflecting Pool, Mana Confluence, and City of Brass. A few fetch lands, just as good lands. We've got Scalding Tarn, Verdant Catacombs, and Misty Rainforest. Playing an Ancient Tomb because, as I said, the deck can be quite slow, so this can really help us to ramp into trying to set up our win conditions and then 2 basic lands, 1 forest, and 1 island. So those are all the cards in the deck. I think it's a really cool deck. I've played it before, and is it good? No. But is it fun? I think this deck is really fun. It's definitely not a deck you want to play in 1 versus 1, because it'll be almost like you're not even playing. Your opponent will just run you over before you get to do anything really. But in a 4-player game, if you have a slow start, chances are your opponents will more or less ignore you. And when it gets going, you can win the game. What I think is really cool is that you can be working towards one of your win conditions, and then as you're putting things together, you can incidentally kind of move toward another win condition. So you're like, oh, I don't need to win that way, I can win this way instead. Your opponents might not see it coming, or it's fun to see your opponent's reactions as you play these things out. You play one of your win conditions, they're like, oh, okay, we have to make sure they don't do that. You play another one, oh, they can't do that or that either. You play another one, and just your opponent's reactions as you fill up the board with all these different win conditions. It's a very fun thing to do. So I'm quite happy with how the deck turned out, and I look forward to playing it some more. I'd definitely like to know your thoughts on it. Have you played something like this before? Have you seen something like it? I tried to search up a deck like this before putting it together, but I couldn't really find anything like this that existed already. And I'm pretty sure that I do have every card in the game that says you win the game in this deck, but if I've forgotten one, please let me know and I'll throw that in here as well. There are some cards that make an opponent lose the game. I'm not playing those. Like, you saw the Door to Nothingness right there. I'm making an exception for this because I think this card is really cool. There is something like, say, Abyssal Persecutor or Platinum Angel. They also talk about winning and losing the game, but they're not alternate win conditions in themselves. I did have them in the deck in earlier versions, but I cut them in order to make room for cards to try and make these work, or just to make the deck work as a whole. So definitely let me know your thoughts. I'd be happy to read them. If you're still watching though, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I'd encourage everyone to come join my Discord server. You can find a link to that in the video description below. And in the video description, you can also find my affiliate links for Dragon Shield in case you'd like to purchase any gaming supplies. You can follow those affiliate links and help out the channel while you do so. I'd also just like to take a moment to thank all of the patrons who support me on Patreon. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.